You've got my video locked out.
We are live.
All right, I call this finance committee to order. Clerk, has the roll been taken?
Through the chair, roll call has been taken.
Members of the committee, are there any
my video's
declarations of pecuniary
Point of
interest
order,
items appearing on today's agenda?
point of order. My video cannot come on. It says video has stopped because the host has stopped it.
It's being corrected.
Thank you.
We should do that more often.
Always go. We see you guys.
Go Bruins, go. Councillor Van Tilburg, we've noted
Yeah.
that you're having video problems and you're marked on the attendance. And if you have any questions, just ask. We're
Thank
going to
you.
try and work this out in the process.
It may seem like rude interruptions.
That's fine. Okay, does anybody have any pecuniary interests on the items appearing on today's agenda? Seeing none. Members of the committee, are there any other items for consideration or consent that you wish to separate for discussion purposes? Councillor Carpenter?
5.3.3.
Anyone else? Mayor Davis?
5.3.2.
All right. May I please have a mover and a seconder for all items for consideration and consent items not separated for discussion purposes? Moved by Councillor Caputo. Second by Councillor Carpenter. And call the vote. Councillor Caputo.
The items are not separated for discussion, those being item 5.2.1, letter of agreement for 2023-2024 dedicated gas tax funds for public transportation program from the Ministry of Transportation. Item 5.3.1, financing lease policy. Item 5.3.5, the minutes carried on a recorded vote of 5-0. Those councillors voting in favor, Councillors Van Tilburg, Carpenter, Caputo, Sullivan, and Mayor Davis.
Thank you. There's no delegations, there's no presentations. May I please have a mover and a seconder to put all separated items on the floor? Moved by Mayor Davis, seconded by Councillor Caputo. All right, we'll move on to 5.3.2. Mayor Davis, you asked for this to be separated?
Yes, I did. Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair. So question to staff, the predicted surplus from last year, approximately $4 million.
Through the chair to Mayor Davis, yes, that is correct.
All right, and so we'll have a final number in June.
Yes,
And then it's in June, we decide how we should allocate the surplus.
that is correct.
Okay. So I'm looking at the various departments, many of which generated a surplus. That's quite commendable. But there is one in Parks and Recreation Facilities. And I'm not sure if this would go to you, Joelle, whether it goes to the CAO, this question, Mr. Chair. But concerned about some of the items that are leading to the deficit in Parks, Rec, and Facilities, such as an overage in part-time staff when actually program revenues are down, which would suggest there wasn't a need for that much overtime and part-time staff. And also, I would think fairly predictable items like landscaping being about $214,000 over budget in cleaning supplies. Is there an issue in terms of the budget estimates? Or is there some other factors at play here?
We do have a number of staff that have asked to be on virtually. I believe Rick Cox is online. Here he comes.
Through the chair, thank you very much for the question, Mayor Davis. You're correct. There are some outstanding issues with respect to the budgeting estimates for aquatics and fitness that we have addressed with the 2024 budget. There was a significant overage in part-time staff related to a shortage in full-time staff, partly related to covering shortage in vacant full-time wages, and also an understanding around staffing for program attendance and bringing assistant lifeguards on stream, getting them the experience they need to be able to be full-time lifeguards. So there was a sort of a training aspect and a coverage aspect that because of our lifeguard shortage over the last several years, that led to the overage in part-time staff. We still haven't seen a full recovery in aquatics program revenues through 2023 because of the capacity issues we had, but I'm pleased to say that we're at full capacity with our staffing, and we're also having full capacity with our registration. So I'm looking forward to seeing 2024 being an appropriate, or coming in on track with it within the aquatics and fitness team. A lot of the elements that were related to that department came into our sort of my portfolio mid-year, and we took steps mid-year to align them for the end of the year, but by then we were sort of off track and hard to get back on track. With respect to the deficit in the arenas, the full description there talks about overage in building and equipment maintenance, including landscaping. A large degree of expenses related to bringing the Civic Center up to readiness for our fabulous season with the Bulldogs. The landscaping around the Civic Center, the garden out front, those weren't anticipated in the 2024 budget initially, but of course we didn't want to have the Civic Center not ready for the opening day of Bulldog season. So that's where the unpredictable expense related to landscaping specifically comes in, and the building itself isn't or wasn't really ready for 3,000 people to use it twice a week through the season. So that's where the overage in just maintaining the building and the equipment came in.
Okay, a supplemental question having to do with Earl Haig. There was an overage in building equipment maintenance, natural gas, and chemical costs at Earl Haig of $46,000. Just so I understand how significant that is, what is the overall budget for Earl Haig?
I'll take a minute to pull that up.
Percentage context.
Yeah, if you can, I'll respond to that in a second while I pull it up.
Perhaps that information can be obtained for me offline, Mr. Chair. And so I'd like to know what is,
Rick, I can jump in if you want. Just from a
Thank you.
gross, from a net expenditure budget standpoint, there are the facility related budget for Earl Haig for 2023 was $169,000, and then additional net expenditures on the programming side of $97,000 for a total budget of $266,000.
And so this is in addition to that, the 46,000.
It's an overage, yes.
So that's almost 20% overage.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. And so I can understand if you have a 5 or 10% overage, why 20%?
Again, what we found with Earl Hague, as you know, the facility has been underutilized through COVID, and coming back out of that, there was some equipment, some pumps, some water heaters, some repairs that needed to be made in order to keep it operating. We also experienced some issues with the having to repaint the basins before season startup. The chemical costs increased dramatically over the last several years. So those were the contributing factors to the overage.
And on the revenue side for Earl Hague last year, was there a corresponding increase in revenue?
There was an increase over the previous year, Mayor Davis, through the chair, but we still have not recovered to pre-COVID attendance rates.
Okay, last question I have through to Joelle. There's information in the appendixes attached to this report, and it has to do with the police services budget. One appendix refers to the operating deficit last year, which I think has now been pegged at about $900,000. Yeah, $959,000. How does that compare to, I was trying to remember, what was the amount that the deficit was predicted it was going to be, that we heard, I think, back in the fall? It was more than 959,000.
Through the chair to Mayor Davis, yes, that is correct. It was about $1.7 million back in October.
So that's
when the
what was
board came.
predicted in, I think, November. And so fortunately, didn't turn out to be 1,700,000. Do we know what the difference is? Like, why was it overestimated by $800,000?
No, I really don't have enough of the details to be able to explain the variance experienced by the Police Services Board.
All right. And then also in the same appendix, or it's a different appendix, it has to do with the capital projects and the reserve for police capital projects. And I'm not quite sure what that appendix is telling us. Are you able to summarize it for us?
Through the chair, yes. So this was in regards to their capital. So they identified a list of capital projects that they were ready to close. The majority of the projects on the list were funded from police reserves. And I believe the intent here was probably just to advise the board that there was surplus in those projects, that they were returning to police reserves, or perhaps there was deficits in those projects that they were funding from the police capital reserve. On this list of projects, though, there were 4 projects that were funded by the city. So even though they are managed by police, they're police projects through the estimates process, they were funded from the city's capital funding envelope reserve because there was not enough money in police reserves to do so. So at estimates that at these various points in time, there was a request through estimates for the city to fund these projects, which we did approve. Now, 4 of these projects have ended up in a deficit situation, one exceeding the staff authority limits to fund within our existing finance policies. So we did need to bring this to council to be able to fund. So the total deficit of the 4 projects that were funded from the city reserves is a little over $103,000. So there's options on how we can fund that. The board did pass a formal resolution at their meeting on March 14th. And the resolution was that the capital projects included in that report to the board be closed and the city be requested to fund the deficit in the capital funding envelope of $103,816. So the intent of this is they're looking to the city to fund the deficit in the projects that the city initially funded.
Mayor Davis, would you like to go back in queue?
Absolutely.
Council Carpenter?
Thank you. I'll start with the supplementary taxes. We've got a surplus here of 2.6 million. Now, over $500,000 is due to increased level of tax arrears. Is this significant above what we've seen in other years for tax arrears?
Through the chair to Councillor Carpenter, Judy Moore, Director of Finance. So no, our tax arrears were actually pretty much in line. We usually predict somewhere around $13 million in tax arrears, which generates some revenue for us. But it's hard to predict that in advance. So we've been a little on the conservative side, I would say, in our budgeting efforts historically, which is why we see this surplus. But we did increase the budget in 2024 because we are seeing this trend. So we did increase the budget so we wouldn't see this kind of a surplus again in 2024.
So the appeal surplus of 894,000, we keep a certain amount in that budget. What is the base number that we keep that? Is it $1 million or $2 million? For appeals?
It is really just a percentage of the estimate based on the appeals that are outstanding and an estimate at any time of how much potentially we would need to write off. So there's always that allowance amount and we do adjust it up and down annually. Right now, because haven't had a reassessment in so long and most of the appeals from the previous assessment cycle have been resolved, our allowance was quite large. And so we've brought that down to better reflect that we just don't have that level of appeal or the exposure currently to warrant having an allowance the size we did.
And what do we bring it down from to?
If we can't get that for you, I'll get Pat to provide a memo
Sure,
before council.
before he goes. Gonna miss Pat. Okay, the local housing corporation, we had a surplus there. Does that surplus stay with us?
Through the chair, yes, it does.
Oh, that's
The
good.
tax supported, portion, it's
we
the city portion of
We've
that.
used all the provinces and he fed money up first and then keep ours for the end.
That's
I
correct.
appreciate that, doing that, okay? And I want to move to the deficit related to Parks and Rec. The aquatics program is down significantly, 152,000. Is that, and we raised the rate significantly on signing up for new swim programs and so forth. We eliminated the family quota there. Are we overpricing ourselves? Is that why we're seeing less activity? Are we seeing same number of programs, but less people signing up? Used to be that you'd line up to get into these programs.
Through the chair, the Councillor Carpenter, we are seeing that our programs are being fully registered for, Councillor. It's not a participation issue. In 2023, it was really about a capacity to deliver the number of programs we have in the past. And we didn't have the staff to do that. We are now at full complement and are offering a full complement of programming, and they are being fully registered.
Okay,
Where we can, and we have waiting lists, we add capacity to bring as many folks off the waiting list as we can. And so we are fully booked out in our program offerings.
okay, I appreciate that, Rick. And my final one to planning, we've got a deficit in application fee revenue due to decline in the number of planning applications submitted as a result of the current economic downswing. So is this number 318 much lower than we would see in an average year as far as deficit?
So through the chair to the counselor, Nicole Wilmot, Director of Planning and Development Services. No, actually, over the last several years, we've experienced an increase in our application revenue. So I think that this was really just a result of, we started out quite strong in 2023, although we did experience a decline in application volumes towards the end of the year. However, first quarter of 2024, we're off to a good start, a strong start. So we're hoping that this is not the trend moving forward.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other first-time speakers? Mayor Davis, second time?
Yeah, I'd like to come back to the police capital deficit. So when we did the budget, when the budget was done by staff late last fall, what were the assumptions made in respect to the police capital reserve and whether or not we'd have to top it up in 2024? Did we expect there would be a balance, a positive balance in that reserve going forward in 2024 that could be used to pay for police capital expenditures? And thus, were we not anticipating having to top it up?
I believe when representatives from police presented their budget, which I don't have in front of me, again, because their reserves really aren't sufficient to fund the capital program that was put forward and ultimately approved by the board. When their capital program came to estimates, there was a mix of funding sources to fund their 2024 capital program. So that, probably their multi-year capital program as well. So that included some projects being funded from their reserves, the police dedicated reserve, and other projects being requested to be funded through the city, through our capital funding envelope. So that was, we knew coming into 2024 that they could not fund their capital. We did fund some of their capital through our own reserve as well.
Let's go at it a different way. So what do you anticipate is going to happen this year based on what we saw, the experience from last year?
I do know that the board did include some increase to their capital reserve funding through their operating budget. I don't know how that looks as it proceeds through a multi-year process for them. So it's really difficult for me to determine how close they're getting to be able to fund their total program from their own contributions, from their operating budget to their own reserves. What's key here is these are older projects. These are projects that were approved through many prior year budgets. Some of them back to, well, it looks like mostly 2022 and 2023, where a budget was approved. We approved to fund it. We approved it at a certain level. And then the projects have come in over budget. Just like in some cases they do when the city, we have projects that end up in deficits too. Most of the time they're very minor. We have finance policies that allow us to be able to fund those. And then if something significant were to happen, we have to come to council and request more money. This is what they've done. They've gone to their board. They've said, we have these deficits in these projects. The city funded these ones from the get-go. We're going to request the city to fund the overages as well.
Okay, let's go back to the surplus for last year and how that might be allocated. So when we get the report at the June 2024 Finance Committee meeting, will the recommendation also accompany the final surplus report? Like how much you'll recommend we put into, say, corporate contingencies, how much towards funding this police capital reserve? So we will have specific recommendations coming to us.
Yes, those will be part of the staff recommendation in that report. Yes.
All right. Well, I would just say in advance of that, I'm certainly hoping, I believe staff are intending to do this as well, that a significant part of that budget surplus will be used to top up our hospital redevelopment reserve fund, something we set up about 2 years ago, close to, I think, 9 million in that right now. it's very important that we continue to contribute and add to that reserve fund each year. It sends a very important signal to the province that we're prepared to fund our part of the cost of a new hospital. And, you know, I might say this as well, that it's important for all the local partners, the city, the hospital foundation, and also the county of Brant and any other interested parties, send out a signal now that we're prepared to make that contribution, already planning for it. And I just will say this, Mr. Chair, I am very concerned about the county taking out of their budget for this year a 1% levy that they had originally proposed. I'm very concerned about the impact that is going to have on the planning for a new hospital and the signal that sends to the province. Hopefully that's just a temporary budget issue, and perhaps we should be discussing that next week at the City County Joint Services Committee. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Councillor Carpenter for second time?
Thank you. I don't think we should be commenting on the county's business, but that's okay. It happens quite a bit here sometimes. The surplus, the surplus, are we gonna allocate some of the surplus? We got a 4-year budget. And that's estimate, you know, when we do 4-year budget. Are we putting any surplus away to deal with anomalies in the 4-year budget going forward?
Through the chair to Councillor Carpenter, when we had surplus at the end of 2022, we did make a contribution to a new reserve fund. It's our tax stabilization reserve fund. I believe we kickstarted that as with part of last year's surplus of $2.7 million. And that's an amount that we expect will be sufficient to, at this time, that we expect would be sufficient to cover off some of those variances that we might expect to see.
In the 4 years?
Correct.
Okay. And the final one to Parks and Rec. Rick Cox, I heard you say that some of these expenses, the landscaping, were around the Bulldogs because we had to do extra landscaping at the Civic Center. Why wasn't that charged to the Civic Center account?
Through the chair, it was charged to the Civic Center account and budget, and it's showing up in the Arena business unit, it was charged to the Civic business unit, and it's showing up in the Arena's division as part of that overage. So the landscaping around the building was charged to that building's business unit.
And just to Joel, how are we accounting for the costs for the Bulldogs? For example, there's a police cost, there's this cost, there's various costs for each game that costs the municipality or taxpayer some money. Are we keeping that a separate account of that number so we know what the actual cost is? Or are we just attributing to each different budget across the city and then they just sort of put it in their budgets?
Through the chair to Councillor Carpenter, yes, there are a few divisions across the city that are experiencing expenses, and those are being reflected in the individual budgets. We don't have a consolidated budget for everything Bulldogs.
Yeah, so we don't we're not really tracking the Bulldogs expense then. So we could report it.
Not as a sole business unit, no.
Is it something we can go back and track, or are we able to track that? I mean, we hear lots of accolades about Bulldogs and I'm a big fan, but I'd like to know the actual costs.
I believe it's probably pretty manageable within the departments that are seeing both revenues and costs related to the Bulldogs, that they would be able to report on those.
So as you're saying, individual budget, so the police, the police presence at every Bulldogs game for traffic, that would go to the police budget.
If we can, I mean, I'll correct that. So if I can just jump in, that would go with Public Works budget. They're paying for that, which is Parks and Rec is paying for that, as well as, so we don't have a Bulldogs budget, which is well, we can extract those various, about 5 or 6 different lines for costs. We can also extract the revenues too. We get revenue per ticket for every game as well. So that can be done, but we don't have a Bulldogs budget like department.
So you said that, you mean the traffic that the police are there, that's being funded by engineering?
Public Works, yeah, not just engineering,
Works,
Public
fu-
Works, yeah,
Funds that pays the police. Okay,
yes.
all right, thank you. I would like to know those numbers eventually though. Thank you.
Counselor Caputo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to Joelle. So, since we're on the topic of the costs for Bulldogs, does it reflect the same costs that we spend on parks such as Earl Hague with a $300,000 budget? Like I noticed that we're sitting here with a $59,000 overspent at the Civic Center plus landscape, but do the two numbers kind of coincide with each other? Cost of Earl Hague and the cost of Bulldogs?
No, I would say no. And I do just need to go back and correct what I said about Earl Hague as well. There is two components. There's the facilities with the facilities budget, which is largely the cost that the mayor was referring to there. That is $169,000 budget. On the programming side, the 97,000 is actually a revenue generating. So that's the fees for using the facility less the staffing costs to do the programs. So I just wanted to correct that. With respect to costs for the Bulldogs, and Brian might want to jump in here, but our current agreement, it's not the city that's incurring all of the costs related to that. The organization is incurring many of the costs for game day events as well. Those costs are split between the city, not equally, but there's a share for the city, the share being borne by the organization, as well as the city is seeing revenues. We do get a per ticket revenue that is coming to the city.
Thanks.
Counselor Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Regarding the police at the Bulldogs game, the question was asked at the last Police Services Board meeting. And the answer we got there was that the Bulldogs were paying for the paid duty expenses for the police. So I'm not sure if that's coming from the Bulldogs or coming from Parks and Rec, but if staff could check on that and clarify that, I'd appreciate that. But that was a concern of the board. And the answer we got was that the Bulldogs were covering that expense. So I'm not really sure what the correct answer is there. But that's what I wanted to say about that. Thank you.
I believe Indrajit Hans, I believe you're online, right? So I believe
I'm here. Sorry, my video may be off, but through the chair, there's two costs. There's the traffic cost that was covered by the city for the paid duty officers outside, but the OHL requires the Bulldogs to have officers inside during the game, and that was probably the cost that the police board heard of, the cost borne by the Bulldogs. The traffic services budget covered the paid duty officers on the road.
Okay, so that wasn't explained to the board properly. Then I'll bring that up at the next meeting. Thank you.
Not seeing any other hands, we'll call the vote.
Mine's not coming up. I'll vote yes.
Item 532 carries on a recorded vote of 6-0. Those councillors voting in favor, Councillors Ventelberg, Carpenter, Martin, Caputo, Sullivan, and Mayor Davis.
Thank you. 5.3.3, Counselor Carpenter, you asked to have this separated?
Yes, thank you. I want to draw your attention to the statement in cash in lieu of parkland spending for the year 2023. Dufferin Park Development has a $1.5 million expenditure out of cash in lieu of parkland development. I thought that was a funded capital project separately. And what was the total cost of that project?
Through the chair to Councillor Carpenter, just so I understand the first part of the question. So the Dufferin Park redevelopment project is its own capital project. What we're required to report on legislatively through this report is any development charges or cash in lieu of parkland monies, both of which sit in separate reserve funds that we're legislatively required to report on annually how we spend the money in those funds. So because cash in lieu of parkland funding was used as a funding source, not the only funding source, but a funding source for parkland development, that's why it's on here, just to indicate that 1.56 million from that specific cash in lieu of parkland reserve fund was used for the project.
So when the original capital plan was put forward, was it not fully funded?
Yes, it was. We're just looking at the project right now. So it looks like overall for the project, it's about a $4.4 million project in total. What's simply being reported here, because we have to statutorily,
Yep.
is how much we've used from our cash in lieu of parkland reserve fund. So out of the $4.4 million total approved budget, 1.56 million currently has come from cash in lieu of parkland.
Yeah, I
reserve
think we
fund.
updated that project too and added to it because I don't think there was originally a building. We added the building afterwards, but okay. So do we track where the cash in lieu money comes from?
Not from no, we don't.
So if I'm a developer and I got to pay 5% cash in lieu for parkland because I can't provide parkland for my development, are we at risk somewhere of them coming back to us saying, well, my development's in this area over here. I paid cash in lieu of parkland for it and you put it way over there. And why would you be charging me 5% cash in lieu for parkland when it wasn't benefiting the community that I had to pay it for?
Yeah, there's nothing in the act that requires us to use cash in lieu of funds from a certain development and using those funds sort of in that geographical area or in a manner which really isn't specified. The act is really quite general and generic in that we have to use it for park or recreation purposes, but that's pretty much the extent. It is our ability to use those funds for any parks and rec purposes is quite broad.
What's the balance of that account?
Going back into the report here. So the balance at year end is just over $2.1 million.
So we have $2.1 million in that fund. Okay. All right. Thank you. So just speaking to the issue, I've speak to this before. Gray Street Extension had a lot of development and those, all that development, a lot of development, and they paid 5% parkland in lieu of. So, and there's $2 million left in this fund. So I would just hope that I could actually get an actual walkway from Gray Street into Echo Park. So the residents that live on Gray Street can actually get to Echo Park without going through the mud. I was told there wasn't enough funding for this in our budget. So I understand there's $2 million in the reserve fund and it was funded from that particular area. I'd like to see that work done. Thank you.
Not seeing any other raised hands. Clerk, can you please call the vote?
I'm a no.
Councillor Martin, can I please have your vote? Thank you. Item 533 carries on a recorded vote of 4-1. Those councillors voting in favor, Councillor Ventelberg, Martin, Sullivan, Mayor Davis, Councillor Carpenter voted against, and noting Councillor Caputo was out of the room at the time of the vote.
Thank you. There's no resolutions, no notice of motions. We are adjourned.